Hi friends, I'm going to be talking about something a little bit different today, which is the book review, but a non-fantasy book review, and it is my review for If Only They Could Talk by James Herriot, which is also known as All Creatures Great and Small. Let's jump in. In addition to giving my review for this book, I want to preface this by saying I have seen all three series of the new show, All Creatures Great and Small, that airs on PBS, and I love it. It is one of mine and my husband's favorite shows, and he's not someone that even likes period pieces, but this is something that we both really love because we're big animal lovers, and all in all, we really love this series. My mom has been pressuring me to read this book for probably the last 15 years. She's a big fan of James Herriot, so I went in with big expectations, having seen the show and loved it so much, and then felt like the book didn't live up, which is so horrible to say because I know this is a really beloved book. But in addition to giving my review for the book and the quality of the writing, I am going to talk about some of the differences between the first book and the first series of the show. If you're interested in that kind of thing, that is coming up, but I'm going to jump into my review now. James Herriot, who is also known as Alf White, James Herriot being his pen name, was a vet in the Yorkshire Dales in the 1930s. He graduated from veterinary college in Glasgow, and in 1937 was in desperate need of a job because of the Great Depression that was taking place globally and in England. He was finding it very difficult to find work, and a lot of vets at this point were just simply working for lodgings and actually weren't earning a salary at all. He gets a notice in the Post that there is a position open in the Yorkshire Dales from a man named Siegfried Farnan, and he wants to interview him. He gets on a bus, he goes to the middle of nowhere, not having ever been to that part of England, and decides, if this man will take me, I need a job, so this is gonna be perfect. Everything kind of starts to get a little bit chaotic from there. The character of Siegfried is one that is vastly entertaining. He almost comes across as if he has bipolar, in the sense that he is very manic. From one second he's very calm, the next second he's very relaxed. He seems to have a very terrible memory. And we meet a few more cast of characters in the first book, specifically Mrs. Hall, who is the housekeeper for Siegfried, and Tristan Farnan, who is the younger brother of Siegfried Farnan. Siegfried in the book has just purchased this veterinary practice 1 year previously and believes in a lot of modernizing ideas. He is trying to help the farmers of the Dales, but he's terrible at bookkeeping. He's not great at collecting on payments, and he needs an assistant, and that assistant becomes James. James Herriot for this book details a lot of the day-to-day life between him, Tristan, and Siegfried living in the house, which is known as Skeldale House, as well as his venturing out and helping the animals and a lot of the farmers, and what it was like to be a vet in this specific area at that time. I personally found that the storytelling in regards to his life with Siegfried and Tristan was very well written. I really enjoyed this. However, I did not enjoy a lot of the writing about the actual veterinary work and farm life, which is something I found to be quite odd because it's one of the things I like best about the show, so I was actually really disappointed in that. Not sure if it's just because the writing seems so different. When he's discussing Tristan and Siegfried, it was so funny and whimsical, and it became a lot more solemn, and while it's supposed to still be quite comical and whimsical when he's talking about the farmers and a lot of the animals, I found it just to be a bit sluggish of a read, and I found myself looking at the book going, wow, this is only 205 pages, but this is feeling like it's taking me a really long time to get through, and that wasn't necessarily a fun thing to be thinking while I was trying to read the book. One of the things I would like to do now, overall, I will say I gave the book a 3 out of 5 simply because I thought that the parts with Siegfried and Tristan were well written, but I don't know if this is a book series I will continue to read. I love the series and I will definitely continue watching it. I feel that the way it has been adapted has been so beautifully done, and I understand that this is the second adaptation. The first adaptation started in the late 70s or early 80s and finished in 1990, and this one started, I believe, 3 years ago, and I have just absolutely loved this adaptation. So I'm going to start talking about a few key differences that I noticed between the show and the book for series 1 at least, because I figure book 1, series 1, they should kind of correlate. So I figure let's jump in. One of the main things is that Jim is not left in the middle of nowhere. He actually takes the bus fully into the town, which is named Derby in the book. This is a fictional place. In reality, he was in Thirsk in England. and we see that he is not invited by Mrs. Hall. He is actually invited directly by Siegfried himself, which I thought was rather interesting because in the show they've actually really lowered the age of Mrs. Hall. In the book, Mrs. Hall doesn't really play a massive role. She's simply the housekeeper, but in the show, I think they've actually done a great thing in that they've made her much more involved with the day-to-day life and happenings of the house, and they've made her more of a counterpoint to the ridiculousness of Siegfried, and she is why James has been invited to Skeldale House to have his interview, and I thought that that was a really good starting point. The show starts in Scotland. However, in the book, it does not start in Scotland. It starts with him hands deep in an animal, trying to get the animal to birth, and I thought this was probably a bit better the way they did it in the show. We get a little bit of background of where James is coming from and why it's important for him to get a job and his family dynamic. I actually really preferred the starting of the show compared to how they did it in the book. One of the things that I need to get out of the way right now, which is actually very strange in my opinion, is that Hugh and Helen are not in the book at all. Helen is not mentioned at all, but Lord Houghton is mentioned, which is Hugh, and James's first job is putting down Hugh's horse. In the show, we know that Hugh is there for when all of this happens, and this is a really big point of contention between James and Hugh because Hugh is dating Helen, whom James has a thing for, and in the book, we just don't know any of this because we haven't met Helen, when in the show we meet her very quickly on in the bus when he is taking the bus to Darby. There is one plot line in the season that I thought was really funny. It's where we see the chickens that have been placed under the care of Tris. In the book, yes, there are the chickens, but the thing that is more important are the pigs, and the pigs aren't in the show. I can understand why they didn't do this, just because I think it would be a lot harder to be wrangling all of these pigs to try to get them to do exactly what you want to do. But I did think that this was actually one of the funnier parts of the book, was this whole thing happens where these pigs escape and he has to try to find a way to find them and get them back into their crate. And then unfortunately for the pigs, they are sent off to become bacon because Siegfried thought it would be really important for them to grow their own bacon and eggs, neither which is entirely successful because it seems that they don't know how to keep animals even though they know how to help animals. Another big difference is the ball that Miss Pomfrey holds at her house. We see that Siegfried and James both attend in the show, which was really fun. I thought it was a great way to have him kind of walk James through the event. In the book, it is just James that attends, and Tricky Woo is very much an important character in the book and in the show, as is Mrs. Pomfrey. I actually liked in the book how they get a little bit more in depth with Tricky Woo and Mrs. Pomfrey. This was one of the few, I would say, veterinary aspects of the book that I thought was really well done, and I enjoyed this. I thought all in all it was good. And last and not least, I found that one of the major differences, which I thought was kind of interesting that they didn't include in the show, was that Siegfried hires a secretary in the book in order to help him maintain the books. And this is because at one point he puts Tristan in charge of the books and he loses the ledger, and they keep sending people the same bill over and over and over, and it enrages the farmer so much that he realizes some action needs to be taken, and he hires a secretary. She's in her 50s and she's able to put Siegfried in his place quite a bit. I actually think that this would have been a really funny addition to the show, but I understand that as the series has progressed, Helen has kind of taken on that role of secretarial assistance with doing the books and the financing, so I think that they probably just didn't want to introduce a new character in order to then have her replaced by Helen. All in all, if you like the show, you may like the book. I think I am in the minority of people not really loving this book. If you love this book and have watched the series, I would love to know which one you think is better, and or if you love them both equally. Do you think the adaptation is as good? And if you've watched the original adaptation, do you think that one is better than the new one? Because I've only watched the new one. If you would like to help support me, you can hit like and subscribe, and if you would like to follow me on Instagram, you can find me at Fantasy Awash. Thanks as always for tuning in, and I will see you next time.